Hey everybody, today I'm joined by good friend and former colleague Kelley Newman, Marketing Activation Manager at Boston Bruins and TD Garden. Kelley, thanks again for taking the time to chat with us today.
Of course, Alex.
Well, it's always wonderful seeing you and always wonderful catching up. But to kick us off, tell us a little bit about your background. I know that the two of us used to work together at Monumental, but I know you've been in a couple of different places, so we'd just love to hear, where have you been, what have you done, and sort of give us an update.
Yeah, I mean, my first job with benefits, and so my first big girl job was working with you at Monumental Sports and Entertainment, which owns the Caps, the Wiz, and a bunch of other sports properties in DC. I think Monumental really sort of led the way. This was about 4 or 5 years ago, with having a partnership intelligence group. So we were part of strategy and research, which then evolved into business intelligence, and the team of three of us, and we were really focused on, data surrounding partnership activations for our CP team. I think it was an awesome first job because I really got my hands in everything from, our LEDs to our radio to our, social, anything on the website. So really getting a full sense of all partnership assets and how to best activate them and then value them and do research behind those sponsorship deals. Was there for a couple of years, absolutely loved it. A position opened up with the Miami Dolphins, which I was lucky enough to get. So I was the manager of business solutions, insights, and analytics. There was no comma in my title, so it was a huge tongue twister to try to fit all that out. Yeah, but the Dolphins, again, did a fantastic job of devoting resources to partnership intelligence. It was a group of three of us again. So we sat directly within the partnerships team, and so we handled any data requests, so all prospecting, consumer insights, market research, working with finance, working with outside agencies and vendors on pricing, really putting deals together, platform development, trafficking, working with our clients to sort of put together the whole partnership deal. And so we work with both sales and activation. Did a great job there. I'm really proud of the work we did. But I kind of just wanted to get back up to Massachusetts, and I thought about business school, and then our old boss from Monumental reached out to me about a job with the Bruins. And so my role now is probably more marketing focused, just by nature of the title, than any of the roles I previously had. But I think what sort of makes my perspective unique coming into this role is I'm not just a traditional marketing person. I'm coming at it from a partnership analytics lens. And it sort of challenged me too, because I have to think brand first in a lot of instances, where in my previous roles, I was always thinking number, revenue, and sponsor first. So I've been here for a little over a year, and it's been a great balance to, work with our marketing teams to make them a little bit more sponsor friendly, but also to keep in mind, the Bruins brand and doing things that are, beneficial for our brand rather than just beneficial for the partners.
No, that's that's really interesting, especially like to your point, like going from like the BI business intelligence side going into more of a brand focused, as a data driven professional, like how has that transition been? Has it been easy? Has that made things easier because you're able to bring the data side to it where most people might not have that kind of data training and data background, or has that been a difficult struggle to translate? Just sort of curious.
Yeah, it sort of was challenging for me at first too, because I'm not used to the fluffy stuff, right? Like here I am now writing copy for social campaigns and like looking at graphics and figuring out how I want to put a sponsor logo next to any of our creative. So that's been a personal challenge for me, but it's been really exciting to kind of work that creative side of my brain more. But I think that hopefully our sales team would say that having me, with my partnership BI experience coming into this role has been helpful for them, because rather than just, saying this is a social campaign that we can do, I'm coming from it, understanding the data a little bit better, understanding, valuation metrics a little bit better, understanding what I think a partner will care about more than, what a standard marketing, brand marketing person would.
Sure. And so, I think, back at your time at Monumental, certainly it was, our business intelligence team was helping work with the partnership team, supplying them data. It sounds like Dolphins were similar. So how does that relationship work at TD Garden and the Bruins? Is it similar where there's a business intelligence team supporting, but then you're someone that's on the partnership team that can appreciate the data? Like how does that work?
Yeah, so there's a digital team and sort of the BI team, which is led by our old boss from Monumental, Josh Brickman, and
Yeah,
they do some great things. But I think, to be candid, our partnership team hasn't had to focus on data as much as some of the other teams I've worked for. And that's just because of the strength of the Bruins brand in the Boston market. I think when you work in a market where the team is maybe, less historically good, or, sport isn't as, popular of an option. Like I think in Miami, there were so many other entertainment options, and the Dolphins
sure.
were historically not so great, that we had to work really hard at selling our partnerships. And I think that the Bruins haven't had to get that creative in terms of building this, big consumer insights database, and, being able to leverage these tools to show exactly, who you're reaching, how you're reaching them, and to really prove the value there. So I think that's kind of what I'm undertaking. I'm, trying to build out a partnerships intelligence group a little bit more with the Bruins, and by group, I mean just myself taking on more work. But yeah, so I'll work with our business strategy team and our business analysts, saying like, hey, I know you have all of this ticketing data from live analytics. Like, can you help me build a profile of the person who stays or who goes to games in this premium lounge? Because we haven't, in pitching entitlements for that space before, we never really talked about who exactly was the person sitting in that seat. So I think that's where we're kind of working and doing new things.
Well, I mean, I think you taking things on all by yourself is nothing new. So I imagine that you are perfectly positioned to be up for the task. So that comes
Thank
as
you.
very little surprise. So I mean, I think the other interesting viewpoint that I'd love to sort of pick your brain on is, one, you've sat on like two different sides of the partnership, right? It's the very data-driven BI. It's now the brand side. I think you have an appreciation for both. But in general, over the last 4 or 5 years that you've been in the industry, what kind of evolution have you seen on the corporate partnership side? Is it a stronger reliance on telling stories about the brand? Is it stronger within the data side? Is it something else? Like what have you seen evolve? From like just a general standpoint, from the sports industry in general.
Yeah, I mean, definitely focused more on data-driven insights and digital assets. I think even when we were at Monumental 4 or 5 years ago, we had just started using Blinkfire, to track sort of our social valuations. There were all these vendors that were, breaking into the space and trying to show us that we need to be a little bit more savvy in how we recap partnerships and how we, set the value of these partnerships. I think
Sure.
historically, it's like, here's a dasher board, and sure, here's some, Repucom numbers or now Nielsen numbers for the value of that. We used to just be able to say, this is our attendance and this is the team's record, and we're so good, buy a sign with us. And now brands are becoming much more savvy, and they need to see the value of the sign. That the sign isn't going to directly contribute to sales for them, right? So how do you prove the value of that? And I think especially, brands are getting much more savvy on social assets and on digital assets too, where they can go out and run their own social campaign and track link clicks and track revenue from each of those ads for a much cheaper rate than they would get, doing a social campaign with a team. And so how do you show the value of, yes, you can, run your own social ads much cheaper, but you're not tapping into our fan base. You're not getting the inherent value of having your logo next to our
Right.
logo on a digital campaign. And I don't think there's a perfect science for that yet. And I think that's where we really struggle, where it's not just, we did 12 posts and you got 1 million impressions and 100,000 engagements. Here's your campaign. It's so great. What's the next step? How do we really prove the brand association value? And then how do we prove, real return on investment, whether that's purchases or signups or things like that?
Yeah, it's definitely a lot. And one of the things I wanted to zero in on that you had mentioned there was that brands are becoming more savvy. So curious about that. So when you say that brands are becoming more savvy, is it that they're able to just pull more of their own data? I think the example that you had used was like social media. So is it more savvy in the sense that they're able to see and pull the data themselves and check it against whatever you're providing? Or is it savvy in terms of the types of questions that they're asking, the type of data that they're looking for? What does that balance look like?
Both. I think you look at these, big brands that work with multiple teams and have huge budgets, and they're measuring their own campaigns on their end. And so we're presenting them numbers, and they're, of course, checking numbers from different vendors on their side. But I think, I'm also having conversations with partners when I'm doing recaps where they're asking me about average engagement rates. How is this campaign perform relative to anything else you run? And I don't think I was having that many of those conversations a few years ago. Instead, an old recap would just be like, we had this attendance and we posted, 12 times on social for you. And now partners are, sort of asking for more information.
Yeah, and I imagine that part of it too is that it probably depends on the partner, right? Some partners are probably a little bit more data savvy than others. Um, I don't know how quite to ask this, but it's just like they might be asking for these things, but how often do you think these teams are really using that data to inform the decisions that they're making, right? And I guess where I'm trying to go with it is, as I just recall, just in any type of data role, how often you're asking for data and you're doing analysis on it. But like at the end of the day, it's like you conduct an analysis, it's looking, at historical data and you're like, okay, cool, that's what happened. But then you don't actually do anything with it. So I'm curious, like, do you have, any sort of insight or maybe even an example of like how a brand or even an organization for that matter has, taken something that was like data related average engagement rate and actually done something with it? Or is it more of still what I recall, which is, checking a box of, okay, it's a good engagement rate, so we're happy with the fact that, the relationship is performing. But, just sort of curious, throwing that out there.
Yeah, I think to your point, I mean, nothing, I'm sure as soon as this call ends, I'll think of some really good example.
Sure. We'll chat after the after dark rendition, right?
But nothing is really standing out to me too. And I think that's what's frustrating for a lot of partnership teams too. And, you get approval on, a big budget to buy all these, vendors that are going to prove this value to you. And you have all these cool tools that track campaign performance. And you have some partners who say, oh, this is cool, but you don't really, some partners don't even really pay attention. And then you
Right.
don't see sort of tangible changes there. And so I think the onus is really on the team to be making those decisions. I think, for the most part, when you're working with partners, you're working with the people who are, the brand people, right? You're not working with sort of the consumer insights team there. And so the brand people are going to be focusing on their ad campaigns and what sort of their brand strategy is. And they might pass on that information to someone on their team who understands it a little bit better. But I would love to get to the point where, we're looking at year over year campaign performance and saying like, okay, well, when we did things on Instagram with this kind of activation, it was much more successful. You generated much more sales than a Twitter campaign, but not there yet.
So Kelley, as always, I would expect nothing less but like the perfect segue from you. So relationships, right? So, ultimately, between an organization and a brand and agencies, depending if they're involved, it's all about having a healthy and a good relationship so that, you're providing value, brand is receiving value, the retention of that relationship continues on. So like in your mind, like what goes into a good, successful partnership between, a brand and a team?
Yeah, I think this past year with COVID is a great example. Our sort of leadership, which has been, excellent advice, has just been do the right thing by your partners. And so we've bonused partners a lot of things. We've, given them assets that aren't in their contract.
Sure.
We've delivered above and beyond. It's really to do the right thing by your partner, to, have a good relationship, be honest with them, not try to, I think sort of when you think of salespeople, you could think of like a sleazy car salesman, sleazy
Sure.
sponsorship salesman. And those people don't have great success because partnerships, unlike anything else, is really relationship based. So I think if you have that really strong relationship, that friendship, that you show your partner that you're willing to go above and beyond, to switch out some assets year over year, depending on what their brand strategy might be. Over a 5-year contract term, you've signed an agreement on year one with specific assets, and then as we know, I mean, how different things are from 5 years ago. There needs to be a little bit of flexibility in your assets and how you can align. So I think the Bruins have done an awesome job with partnership and relationships, and I'm really proud of where our group is with that.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear, and glad to hear that it's going well for you guys. I mean, I think probably a lot of it, and you'd likely agree with me, but I don't want to put words in your mouth, is it's probably also, especially given everything that's going on in the environment now, it's really probably more communication and over communicating than ever before, of just saying, hey, this asset might not be working, what can we do to improve it, right? So I imagine that's a big part of it. But to address the elephant in the room, how has like COVID-19 and everything going on with the pandemic, like how has that changed the game as it relates to sponsorship?
Yeah, I mean, even so, we worked for our 1920 season. We worked with our partners to sort of figure out exactly how much we delivered versus, what we weren't able to. So we missed 6 home games, and so all of the assets that were in arena were dependent on, those home games. We weren't able to deliver, and so we went to those partners, over communicated that, we're extremely honest, and said, we've missed. There's a $50,000 gap here. These are a few proposals of how we can make up for that. And so because everything is shifted to digital, that's been our huge focus. And luckily, not to toot my own horn, but the Bruins are #1 in engagements across all.
Heck yeah, toot that horn.
It's my brilliant content planning. It's not. It's people much smarter and more creative than me coming up with our content. But we've been in a great position just because we have such a strong digital following, across our web, across our app usage, across engagements on social. We're #1 in the league. And so we're able to leverage that fan base and, provide and make good assets. So an in-game feature that, we would typically do on the Jumbotron, we've been able to translate into a social feature. And so we're figuring out alignments there.
Nice. So, last couple of questions, then I'll let you go because I know your time is valuable. But what would you say, like typically, across the board, what are some of the major, systemic challenges that partnership teams are coming across, whether or not it's specifically in COVID or just in normal times? Is it the data driven piece? Is it telling stories? Is it retention? Like where do you see the biggest opportunity for?
Oh my God, I could talk all day about this.
We'll do that segment too.
Yeah, we'll just keep this rolling for a couple hours.
Yeah.
It's definitely the data driven piece. I think listen, sponsorship, like selling a sign is cheap, right? You have the LED boards installed, you have a ton of minutes available throughout the game. It doesn't really take a lot of manpower to get that done. But brands are seeing more value in directly engaging with people. Yes, there's a component of brand awareness, which you get through some of those, signage assets and, logo exposure. But, brands are wanting sort of more complex, in-depth, trackable sponsorship assets. And so I think the data piece applies to sort of all stages of the sponsorship process. It's one, painting who your fan base is, rather than just saying, we're the Bruins, we're the best, come get your sign in front of our fans. It's, trying to identify who those fans are. I think sort of your standard, consumer insights tools from a few years ago would maybe tell you sort of basic demographic information and would say, do you own a car, or do you own a Ford, or are you planning on purchasing a Ford in the next 6 months?
Yep.
And so those are sort of the standard questions we would use. And now there are a lot more sort of survey databases that are online, which gets you much more updated, more frequent data. And you're able to paint a better picture of sort of brand awareness and brand sentiment to those partners that you're making proposals to. So I think, getting a little bit more creative and using some real insights in the sales pitch is going to be hugely important. And then the struggle we always have is recaps. I think every team struggles with recaps. Some teams try to get ahead of it throughout the season. They're probably unsuccessful in that. Recap season is brutal for everyone. And I think, again, as I've said, you talk about attendance, you talk about impressions on social, but that's not really recapping value. It's hard to prove both ROI and ROO from those two things. And then, you have some of these vendors that assign a dollar valuation to a logo exposure, whether that's based on a CPM or CPE or a spot rate on a national broadcast. And so you have all these different units, and it's tough to sort of compare things apples to apples, right? Because on one asset, you're saying, this is the in-arena attendance, this is how valuable your sign was. And then another asset, you're saying, this vendor thinks that's worth $2 million. And then on another asset, you're saying this other vendor thinks that's worth $1 million. And so it's it's really difficult to put everything into units that I think a partner can understand, and process quickly and easily. And you're just pulling sources or pulling data from so many different sources, and it's really hard to keep them all straight. I think my pipe dream is that I would create like a massive universe, sort of like what we built at Monumental, your massive reporting Tableau dashboard, where you would just type in a partner name and you would, see all the different vendors, all the different impressions, everything pulling into one centralized place. But the next step to that would be to apply, appropriate CPMs or, whatever unit of measurement you want to, so that you're able to say, in this entire big sponsorship universe, you paid $1 million for this proposal. You had X amount of impressions, whether that's, in stadium or online or
Sure.
whatever, and then have an appropriate CPM or value tied to each of those, and be able to report back to a partner we delivered, X value. Because really, I think, we don't really do that. Like, sure, you can talk about the value of a dashboard because we have a vendor that tracks that, but we don't have the value of, anything else. So it's kind of hard to be comparing impressions to engagements to clicks to email sends to, dollars earned on social versus dollars earned on broadcast. So my dream is to create a perfect world.
If only somebody was going out there and creating a brand new company from scratch that would aggregate all of the data and add valuations into it in a very sophisticated and accurate way.
Didn't even tell me to say that in advance. So
I know. Jeez, like you're my perfect plant. But last question for you. And by the way, very well said on the last part. Totally agree. It's a major opportunity. I think that's out there for a lot of organizations to improve on. But for those aspiring to get into the sports world or sports sponsorship specifically, what advice would you give anyone that's interested in learning more and trying to get involved in this part of the industry?
God, I want to say don't, but
I'll try. Well, why not? Yeah, be honest now.
I think that's just a joke that people in sports say.
Sure.
It's a really fun, really dynamic industry. I think why I love it so much is that you get to work with all these different brands and sort of understand how their businesses work. Whereas if you just worked in brand marketing for one company, you would understand that company really well, but you wouldn't understand, concessions or food or, anything, any of the other companies that we work with. So networking is key. I think that's how I was able to get my first big internship in sports. And so once I had, that big name on my resume, it was easier for me to line up other internships and jobs. And then even, how I was able to get my first job with you was through a mutual friend who was leaving the company. And, she said, "Oh, I just got lunch with her." And she said, "Oh, you should apply for my job." So networking,
how that works out.
Yeah. And networking is huge. I'm always willing to talk to people just because I feel like I have to pay back for, all the people who have spent time giving me advice. So if anyone's watching this, feel free to send me a LinkedIn message. I'm happy to connect. But
careful, you might get two people to reach out to you.
Watch, I'm just going to get spammed by millions. This is going to blow up way bigger than you ever thought.
Yeah, exactly. You're the reason that we went viral, so thank you. Why not?
Do something absurd, really, just to.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you could end us on something crazy. Also, I found the big head that we had created back at Monumental. So maybe that'll be our new logo that we'll slap on our organization. But
they threw mine away. They had it for a year because I left it there, and then I think someone eventually threw it away.
Well, I will close by saying, first, totally agree with your last statement. Right, I think one of the really amazing things about the industry, and especially I think the role that you had at Monumental, right, is you sit at the crossroad of so many different brands and so many different elements, especially on the data-driven side. You end up wearing a lot of different hats, which I think prepares you, but the royal you as well for anyone coming into a role like that for a variety of different opportunities and roles down the road, just when you have that much exposure to a lot of different things. So I think you're dead on there. But ultimately, the always impressive Kelley Newman, very appreciative of your time. It's always wonderful catching up. Admittedly, it's probably way overdue from us getting together and saying hello, but I'm glad we had the opportunity to do that. And ultimately, just super interested. I think you've had a really wonderful career so far. So I'm just continuing excited to watch to see how that continues to develop. So ultimately, really appreciate the time today.
Well, thank you. This was fun. I'm excited to see what you do at Trajektory. I think it's going to be awesome.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Kelly. We'll chat soon.